Greetings, this is Mr. Nobody. It's been a while since I've weighed in because my previous two videos were about COVID. It kind of enters in a little bit here, but not that much. A quick commentary on COVID. There's a good reason why a lot of these things about masks and all the crazy stuff people come up with, passports. A passport should have most of it nothing more than an excuse to go in someplace without a mask. So you either show and a passport should have been based on immunity and not whether or not you had the vaccine. You survive the disease within so many months or whatever, you're already immune. You don't need the vaccine. You just need to be immune. Or your antibody test shows you got them. You don't know when, where, or how, but you got them. Or you simply have the vaccine. It doesn't matter how you got it. You're immune. We know you're immune. We can medically verify that fact. And all that would mean is you don't have to wear a mask or social distance if you don't want to. Whereas if you don't have that evidence, you just wear a mask and proceed on. That would be the right and proper thing. Of course, governments don't want to. They're not interested in the science. They're not interested in trying to actually stop the disease. They're interested in controlling people's lives and limiting their freedoms. There's a difference between protecting people from spreading a terrible disease and just whimsically doing stuff to oppress people, to force everybody to take the injection, even where in some cases there are solid medical reasons, as well as some who have other reasons, however rational, but they really come within the domain of the natural human freedoms, to decide I'm not going to take the jab, even if it means I have to wear a mask or socially distance everywhere so this thing blows over. I'm not taking the jab, and that would have been fair. But this isn't about fair. This isn't about we want to stop the disease. This is about we want everybody wearing masks and getting jabbed because we want to control people. We want everybody going around like this all the time. If we could keep them doing that way for the next 50, 100 years, we'll do it. And we know this. And the stuff's really all that kind of stuff is becoming less important now because what's happening, and a lot of people kind of sense this, it isn't just that we're worn out. I mean, we are, but I think the other thing is deaths have dropped down to practically nil. I mean, it was like 4% before, which isn't great, but that's actually, 4% of how many millions of billions of people you're looking at in a country in the whole world is still a lot of people dying, okay? But now it's really small, even just hospitalizations, either short-term or those occasional long-term ones that were really, horrible, where there might still be some people who are still on ventilators from last year and the year before that. The long hospitalizations and even just hospitalizations, scarcely ever happen anymore, where they were probably, I don't have any numbers, unfortunately, but roughly about the same as deaths. A small but significant percentage, and numerically over a large population. It's a lot of people. So, but that has dropped down to, also very, very, very small. And, even though a lot of people test positive, and the reason is we test positive because we're exposed to the disease perhaps multiple times, but it either barely affects us or doesn't affect us because we have achieved now, substantially in most parts of the world, true, full, bona fide immunity of the herd. You say, well, isn't that a little soon? Well, remember, a lot of people get this without symptoms. They had this, they got exposed to it, they had it, they're done with it, they're immune, and it's this immunity of the herd. And as your immunity fades, it's still something there that your body can start making the right antibodies again if you're exposed a lot more quickly than it would have been in the very first exposure. So even though the value in the antibody levels of the vaccine or having the disease in the first place, may go down over a long period of time, your body has the tools. It's like it's like a factory can retool very quickly to make something they were just making the year before, and they retooled since then, but they can tool again back and go back into production. They don't have to generate all the tools from scratch. And that's the way our immune system is too. So we've achieved immunity of the herd. It's really time now to move beyond all these COVID things. Now, there's a lot one could say, for example, in some countries where they're still insisting on all these ridiculous lockdowns that never seem to have any effect, which I think still needs to be explained scientifically. I don't understand it, but apparently, not only didn't they work, that much was already established in my previous discussions. But there's more. Well, they need a new crisis. We all knew that having people staying at home, not going to work, and then having to be supplied so they don't starve or whatever means we're going to print a bunch of money for them, create some inflation. This was kind of forced on us in 2020. Or, I guess you could say it was forced on us. I still think once we found out lockdowns didn't work, we could have gone from, not just back to normal, but back to work. Okay, we're going to go back to the office. We're going to wear masks. We're going to distance and things like that. But, and we're going to be careful about the ventilation and things like that and so forth, especially interior spaces, where you have to be conscious of the airflow and, make sure people who might have it aren't near effluvia when they talk and so forth. Doesn't find its way immediately to somebody else who could be exposed and things like that. So they could have done that if they were really serious about the science. But instead, they just said, oh, well, we're going to keep everybody at home. And then they start having these new things where now we're going to go back to work. But, no, not yet. We're not going to let people go unless they're vaccinated. Doesn't matter whether they're immune, just whether or not they're vaccinated. And which is so ridiculous. I mean, not that it would hurt. Even if you had it, you want to get the vaccine, maybe it'll supplement things a little bit, but it's not really necessary. But they didn't, that wasn't the criteria. You see, the criteria were not scientifically set up. The criteria should be you are immune. That wasn't the criteria. And if you're not immune, then you have to be careful, not to risk either getting it or giving it by the social distancing, the mask, the usual strategies. But there's nothing that says you can't go about your work. But that wasn't the rationale. This thing was unfortunately made political and used as an opportunity to create more inflation and to have to print more money. But but as we know, immunity of the herd is taking over. More and more places are just saying, we're done with all these mask mandates. We're done with all these vaccine mandates. We're stopping that. People are free and encouraged to do what's necessary to protect themselves and each other by all means. But, we're not going to sit there and throw you in jail or forbid you to do your job and things like that. That is stupid. Criminally stupid. So, but they still want to find some way to justify inflation. What's the new way? War. Hey, look at this. We're up against Russia. We're looking at, there could be World War III. And that's my significant theory as to what could happen. Let's have a little bit of a background here. I knew this, and I can explain how I knew this, though that should be for another video, that back on January 6th of 2021, and even coming up to that time, I knew that America was not going to see Congress go through and actually learn about and examine and discuss in detail and debate the actual evidence of all the enormous amount of fraud that made the 2020 election what it was. You see, what's the narrative now? Oh, Trump made it all up. No, he didn't. In fact, he was kind of the last on board. Where did it come from? It came from thousands of poll workers, poll watchers, and various others. For example, a guy who was hired a post office driver hired to bring a truck full of ballots from one state to another. Why? What's going on here? Or people working at rest homes or something where the inhabitants are so senile that people working there would fill out all the ballots on behalf of those people and be told to fill out a ballot a certain way for everybody. It had nothing to do with whatever vote, if any, of the residents of the place, would be interested to do. And other accounts like these. And this testimony was being given before state legislatures, state assemblies, governors, different people like that. And these things would get uploaded on YouTube and then they disappear. But I'm watching for this stuff. I see it right away. I step through the detail. I remember these stories. I remember these accounts. There was some very, very serious stuff. Large scale. And yet it just got filtered out every single time. The moment this stuff comes up, it gets uploaded, I see it, and the next day I look for it again and it's gone. I downloaded it, but I wasn't thinking of that. But, that's what would happen. And I thought, and then as I learned, Congress is going to go through all this, and they need to study it this way. And if they go through the states, and especially the ones where clearly the fraud was at work to reverse the results, they're going to go through all that. They're going to call for audits on those states, detailed forensic audits where the votes aren't simply recounted, but verified to be this is an actual ballot cast by an actual flesh and blood human being somewhere in the appropriate state, living there as their primary resident and precinct, casting that one and only vote, and so forth. Because, Joe Biden might have got 81 million ballots, but he only had 68 million voters. Those are the real numbers, I believe, when we get down to it. Call them estimates for now, but those will turn out, I believe, to be the real numbers. 68 million voters, 81 million ballots. Well, probably not quite that many. They may still tweak the counts in other ways, but that's a relatively minor thing. Maybe at least 80 million, let's say. 80 and a half, probably. But anyway, they were concealing this and concealing this. Now, all of a sudden, here's Congress ready to conceive this thing, ready to go through this stuff, step through in detail. And oh man, the biggest one, the one in Georgia, but they caught these guys literally red-handed. Red-handed. They didn't know the security cameras were going. The poll watchers, reporters, and anybody else are gone. They're off the property. They've gotten their car, they packed up their gear, gone away, gone to their cars, and driven off the property. They're not coming back in the building. Good. Are they gone? Are we sure? Right. Now let's pull these other ballots out, which have no chain of custody from any actual voters ever established, because they didn't come from voters. They came from a Xerox machine. So a Xerox machine, or maybe you could go with what YouTube used to put on at the time for a while. The Associated Press has determined that Biden has won, or something to that effect. It's been too long since I've seen it. And there's a element of truth to that, because yes, it's really the Associated Press and not the American people that has decided who the next president shall be. Okay? And Associated Press, though, is only one thing. It's Associated Press, it's YouTube, it's Google, all these, I don't, but all these different things. Big tech companies were just systematically doing this stuff. They were all participants. And it was like, what's going to happen? Now, I have to admit, I didn't picture what was going to happen, but I knew they would not be going through very much of it, if any. What I pictured was C-SPAN and the like, whatever, would go dark. I don't know, cameras are not working, the feed is dead, we're not sure why. By the time it gets reestablished, it's a day or two later after they've gone through, 2 hours, separate sessions, senators and representatives for each of at least the 5, 6, 7 states where there's an issue. And we won't, and America won't know what happened. Even the congressional record for some reason won't be available through Freedom of Information Acts or any of the usual ways that we can look at that. Sorry, this has been classified. America would never know what they actually discussed there. That's what I pictured. So, obviously, they found a much bigger way. They went way beyond anything I could estimate. They created that whole invasion thing, and it intimidated everybody, and all the chickens just said, "Oh well, we're not gonna do this anymore. We're not gonna do our job. Let's just hand it over to the bad guys." And that's what they did. You know, they should have handed it to Trump. I mean, this was done to attack Trump. Trump had nothing to do with it. It was a plot to attack him, and that's exactly what it did. But they're morons, they just said, "Oh, maybe he had something to." I don't know why anybody ever gave that a moment's serious consideration. Doesn't make any sense. So now let's look at what's happening. We've been having more than a year, and it'll be at least 2 solid years of garbage, running of everything. And this is the part that really I'm truly trying to get to. Why aren't they afraid? Let's take an example. Last December 2021, the French government and even their very liberal, easygoing, let's let these Muslim terrorists, just be fruitful and multiply. We're going to be all nice guys. Suddenly decides to crack down on them, doing a very, harsh but unfortunately necessary thing. And why did he do that? Because his election is coming up. As I say this now, the election is still coming. Will he have saved his career by doing that? That'll be seen, when France holds its next presidential elections and so forth. If we still have Macron, or if it's Le Pen or somebody like that. Now, what do we see? What is Biden? What are these, liberal leftists in Congress doing? Are they, trying to, realizing that what they've been doing is a screw up, they need to do the right thing? Or do they just, double down on their screw up? No, we're going to screw it up more. We're going to screw it up worse. We're going to poke the Russian bear until he does something, and we're going to keep poking him until he starts nuking us. I think we're going to have to hope that Putin has more humanity than these American leaders, because he's going to have to. Or we're screwed. Major league. You see, we can see now the American people, by and large, are now turning against them. Even Democrats are going, I'm not voting these characters out, even if I have to vote in a Republican. They're not going to vote these guys in anymore. They're going to go. This is going to be, if we have the election, and I'm saying if we have this election this coming November, it's going to be the biggest red wave in American history by far. I mean, 1994 or 2014 got nothing on this. It's going to be huge. We're going to see whole states that, deep blue states that would think, oh, we're not expecting anything here, to go red. It's going to happen if there's an election. We know if the election were held now, a lot of this would happen right now. And the way these guys are acting, the way they just keep doubling down on the same stupid policy and the same divisive rhetoric against anybody who just wants to be free, wants to, have the American freedoms that the Constitution guaranteed to us. That's all we're asking for. We're not saying we don't have to help other people. We're not saying we have to be violent or crazy or stupid. We're not saying any of that stuff. I don't know why anybody even think we were. We're not. Of course not. But we need our rights, and and they're taking them away, and they're taking away all kinds of stuff. Do you know why they want gas prices to be so expensive? So people can't travel. So that way, if they say, well, we don't like the town of Albuquerque, let's starve Albuquerque. And they just do. And the people won't be able to buy enough gas to drive out of there and get some food from the next town over that they're not trying to starve. That's the thing. That's how they did it in the Russian pogroms and other Russian things, when they were trying, Stalin would do this stuff all the time. People didn't have cars in the first place. It was very easy to take all the food the farmers grew, and if they're not politically acceptable to you, they don't get any of it back. And then they starve to death, and millions die. This is what they want to do. This is the direction they're headed. And Americans perceive this. So like I said, they're doubling down on this. They continue this, You see, right now, if the election were held, you're now going to have a significantly Republican Congress. You know, you're going to have Republican governors, judges, and even mayors and so forth. You're going to have a lot. But you know what? It'll be only more so if things continue like this and there is an actual election. Why aren't they afraid? Macron realized that if he doesn't do something that's actually kind of right wing, as it were, so called, he might not get reelected. So he does something, at least one thing that I know of, right wing. That may or may not save his political career, we'll see. But at least he kind of tried. He realized he has to, at least to some degree, respect the volition of the French people. But these people, Biden and Pelosi and all these other characters in our government, it's like they don't care about what the American people. Screw you, American people. That's what they're saying. Screw you, Americans. We're going to do what we're going to do because we've already taken over. We have already taken over. And there's nothing anybody can do. And we're all hoping, America's all hoping, well, there'll be another election. And boy, we're going to vote the hell out of all of them. Yeah, here's hoping. But you know what? Just as I knew we wouldn't see Congress go through the evidence. Well, we did see part of it in one state, but they didn't even get to finish that one state. And that was actually probably the least interesting of the states. The next would have been Georgia. I would have loved to see Congress go over what happened, what they saw in Georgia. Seeing is believing. I mean, after that, there'd just be no way. I think even Democrats have to say, I think we're going to at least have to call for an audit. A serious, detailed audit. If you really thought you won, you shouldn't be afraid of an audit. You should be saying, yeah, go ahead, knock yourselves out, see what you find, No, they know that or at least they seriously believe that what's going to be found is enough to show that Trump actually won the 2020 election. That's what would happen. And they were, they either knew that would happen or they were afraid that's what would happen. Because there's no proof. Well, what are we going to call proof here? A forensic audit, detailed audited recount that shows exactly. That's proof. Now, either that shows what it shows what all these different people saw, or the results of that, or somehow it doesn't, or maybe that at least wasn't quite enough. Think of North Carolina. People forget North Carolina because it still landed in the Trump column. What they didn't notice is it was also one of the last states to report. Why? Because, like these other states, it too had midnight dumps of ballots from nowhere. Ballots from harvests, ballots from Xerox machines, who know, but ballots that were not actually filled out by human voters. There were huge dumps in the tens of thousands. That was supposed to switch North Carolina to the Biden camp. It's just there were enough flesh and blood voters for Trump that despite all of this, it didn't quite make that threshold. So North Carolina landed, in the Biden camp, in the Trump camp. But, if they didn't enact anything, I'm not up on what North Carolina specifically is doing. We may end up seeing next election, a blue North Carolina, even while Georgia, which now has these laws, and other places, in Pennsylvania and other places that have these laws, are all solid red. Not because people in North Carolina are all supportive of this whole nonsense, but just because, we did okay, so we didn't need to change our laws. So we didn't worry about people who have multiple drop boxes that aren't even watched, and people could just dump stuff in there, and we don't know where it came from, and it doesn't matter where it came from. A ballot's a ballot. We don't care whether anybody's behind it. And, all this kind of stuff could happen. I don't know. I mean, again, all that assumes that we're going to get to 2024 and have an election. Like I said, that's another year. But let's look at this coming November. If there's, Congress is the big focus. I mean, representatives is going to have this vast change. One party goes from a 5-seat majority or thereabouts to probably a 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 seat minority. That's what would happen if there's an election. Now, their only faint chance would be to do like Macron did. Stop their policies. Stop these insane inflation-creating things. And even when it comes to this Ukraine thing, what they really need to do is sit down with the Russians. What probably would end up happening, what would the only peaceable solution at this point, and I think Congress would best try to do, even such as they are, because, Biden wouldn't do it. He would know how. Would be to say, okay, we're going to have to settle for a divided Ukraine, just like we had East Germany and West Germany. Now not anymore, thankfully, but we did for quite a while. Just as we had West Europe and East Europe, where Poland and Czechoslovakia and all these Hungary and Bulgaria and Romania and all these other countries were in the Soviet orbit. Now they're not. But you'd have Ukraine, and you just have an East Ukraine and a West Ukraine. I'm not happy about that. Ukraine probably wouldn't be that happy, although some folks in Crimea and some of those other places might probably be, by and large, fine with it. Now, some more of that might not be quite so happy with it. But, you just got to have to let people, those who are not happy, migrate to other parts of Ukraine, say Western Ukraine, where even Western might not join NATO per se, but would just enjoy NATO's support. That's all. NATO's support. They won't be a part of it, but they enjoy its support. See what I'm saying? At the East, the East we would have to just, at least for now, that's the best we can ask for right now. Just yield. That's the best we can ask for. And I don't know if that's enough to make Putin sit down or not. Because I know he doesn't care how many of his soldiers he sends to their deaths and so forth. I mean, it's kind of weird. I think I care more about all those soldiers, the Russian soldiers, than Putin does, who's using them, and to get even, with the stupid West that now is, we're just lucky he doesn't try to do more. And I hope that luck doesn't run out, but I think they're counting on that luck running out. Or they may have something else. See, I don't know what they're going to do. This is why I say I don't think it's going to be a November election. I hope to God I'm wrong about that. But as it stands right now, just as I didn't see Congress going through the election fraud evidence, I don't see an election at all taking place. Or else, if it does, they will find some way to cancel the result and keep whoever's in there now, today, this minute, still in these places after the 3rd of January next year. There'll be a way. They'll keep them there. I don't know what their means will be, but they'll find something. And it may involve successfully poking the Russian bear into nuking some cities in America. Or any of a lot of different things. That's the only thing I don't know is what is their strategy. But I have reason to think they must have something, because they're not afraid of that. They're not worried about it. They're not even thinking, oh my God, what can we do to recover the support of the American people? Your typical, Democrat congressperson should be thinking now, what can I do to get reelected? I need to stop going along with all this terrible stuff that, America obviously hates and is losing support like crazy. And I'm not going to be a reelected, I've got to prove everybody I'm not that. I want to be an American, at least look like one, and not support this stuff, but we haven't seen much of that. Maybe a little of it at Joe Manchin and a little, Kristen Sinema, maybe one or two others here and there, but it just hasn't been very much. A dollar late and an hour late and a dollar short, for the most part. Everybody else is just doubling down on stuff that they have to know America opposes and will vote out, even though maybe in many cases their own party. The average American Democrat is not the same as your average Democrat politician. The average Democrat American probably would like a safe, reasonable country. They probably picture their party as being like it was in the days of John F. Kennedy or something, when it was a real party, when you could really be an American and not some stark raving communist like it is now. Unfortunately, among the politicians, it's the stark raving communists who significantly, preponderously dominate. The occasional exceptions would probably all be comfortably seated in my living room, among any Democrat politicians who are not stark raving communists. The few that are, a few that actually love their country more than their party, which is very few, I don't think they're enough, even with the close thresholds we've got. Because, of course, we've also got our Republican rhinos. No way. So we're going to be, like I said, I don't see us just peacefully transitioning, to a serious, constitutional, patriotic, American elected Congress this coming January 3rd. I don't see that happening in exactly the same sense that I didn't see Congress going through the election details. I just don't see it. And like I said, I hope to God I'm wrong. But I don't think I am. And this is, I think, something very concerning. Well, I'm taking a half hour of your time. Thanks for listening.